We spent some time on this earlier in the show, Brock. The piece is entitled $4,785. That's how much it costs to be a sports fan now. It was written by Joon in the New York Times as a guest opinion piece. And he's kind enough to take a few minutes to join us on video now if you're watching on YouTube. Good morning, Joon. How are you?
What's up, Salk? How's it going?
Good.
Been a minute.
I know. We spent a good 15, 20 minutes talking about it this morning. So I guess I'll start from your perspective. Why'd you write it? What was the thought behind writing this?
Well, so I was laid off from ESPN in 2023, and I had the opportunity to just sit back for 2 years and kind of get a sense of what the sports media landscape was like. And you guys have been in this for a long time. Just get a sense for like what it's like to be a fan without having any obligation to like have a take or make content out of it or anything like that. And the thing that I realized, I mean, this has been an issue in baseball for so many years with MLB TV, and it's been frustrating for me and so many other people. But I realized that the issue just over the course of the last few years, I feel like it started to really accelerate where, you had the Peacock game during the NFL playoffs that forced people to sign up for that streaming service. The Christmas games on Netflix, which I think most people have Netflix at this point, but, I had friends who were struggling to help out their moms on Christmas trying to get that game up because it was just kind of a departure from everything that had kind of happened. And, in some ways, it's more accessible to watch sports in some ways because, you can watch all games everywhere all the time, but because they're so spread out and because of the financial barrier to get into watching sports, I've noticed it's created a lot of barriers for people to connect with people over sports because, there's the group of people who are like us who are probably watching sports on a night-to-night basis and it's our job and we're hardcore sports fans. And then there's the other group of people who maybe want to get into sports, are more curious about sports, are following on social media, but getting from that like social media, following the soap opera of sports type of fan towards being someone who like engages in sports media every single day, is kind of in the day-to-day weeds of it, is watching a lot of games. That barrier is enormous now because of the financial cost of being a sports fan. And that doesn't even, take into account the price of tickets, the fact that you need high-speed internet to be a sports fan. And that's not accessible to everyone around the country. And then there's also just, the blackouts of it, the cost of jerseys and that kind of stuff going up. So, it isn't just limited to the accessibility of sports broadcasts. It's just every little thing in the sports experience just getting more and more expensive. And all of that small uptick in cost really adds up when you kind of look back and take a step back and think about what it was like to be a sports fan 20 years ago.
And there are so many parts to it. Joon, I read the whole thing as well, and really well done and well written and totally captivated us and our audience as we discussed it earlier. And there's so many different pieces to this. But I do think of my friends in Pullman. I think of my friends in Corvallis. I think of my friends, at those institutions that for decades and centuries were a part of a conference and no longer were. And I think they would tell you, because some of them are my dear, dear friends, of how much the networks and the tail wagged the dog, that the networks had so much power. And the network figures at Fox and ESPN and the biggest brokers of it all have played so much of a role in this. How would you kind of answer to that, and how much of a role do you think the networks have played in this?
I mean, the networks play a role in it, but I think this is all downstream from the way that the leagues have reacted to the shifting consumer behavior. The behavior of fans just shifting towards cutting the cord and trying to find new ways to watch sports in this landscape. Cable is very expensive, but I think one of the things that I covered, on kind of a deeper level on my YouTube channel is the way that the cost of watching sports used to kind of be hidden from sports fans. There was a lot of people who weren't watching sports at all that were subsidizing in many ways our ability to watch sports. And now that those costs are kind of out in the open, for the average person, it's kind of crazy to think about the fact that it costs $30 a month to watch your favorite local team on like a streaming service. But it costs $10 a month to watch the rest of Major League Baseball or the NBA. Like, I can understand on a surface level why that thing wouldn't compute for the average sports fan. And so, I think that this is all downstream from the way that the leagues themselves looked at the loyalty that sports fans have, that people like us who can't get enough of sports, who will ride the ups and downs, who are going to pay for sports no matter what, they are preying on the loyalty of us as fans to want to pay for it regardless of the circumstances, no matter how difficult it is. And I think it's preventing more people from getting into sports. Like one of the numbers that really jumped out to me when I was reporting this in my YouTube channel is that Chicago Blackhawks switched over to a completely streaming only option in the last year. They're no longer getting carried, I believe, on Comcast in that local area. Their ratings have dropped 78%. And so while these national games, the Super Bowl, these big events, the ratings are still maintaining themselves, it's at the local level that this kind of stuff is starting to fall apart.
Well, and that's with, a budding young superstar, one of the best in the game, and Connor Bedard, and a market that loves that sport. There's a lot to that. It's funny you say that word subsidizing. Brock has heard me say that how many times?
Oh, a lot.
As we talk about the death of the RSN and how for years baseball in particular, but to a lesser extent hockey and basketball, have been subsidized by fans or by non-fans who were unknowingly purchasing, paying for root sports in our market, but plenty of other RSNs in other markets because it was just part of their cable package. And that's gone away. And it's a reckoning, I think, for baseball. I think it's why there's going to be a labor stoppage in a couple of years, specifically in that sport, because the NFL is a national sport, because the NBA, to some extent, is a national sport. Do you think this affects baseball and hockey maybe more than the other two sports?
So I think that there's a macro, even bigger story happening here beyond just the things happening with the sports and the streaming situation. On a bigger level, the reason why these sports teams are continuing to go up in value is because of the speculation around the international growth of sports. I mean, I think that this is kind of the backstory of what we're seeing in Boston right now with the trade of Rafael Devers to the San Francisco Giants, is these teams want to have as much cash as possible. Sports is a really weird business because, the best sports teams often are making less money in terms of profit on a year-to-year basis than like the average mediocre team. Pittsburgh Pirates owner Bob Nutting, despite having one of the worst teams in baseball, is making more money on a year-to-year basis, profiting more than most owners in baseball. And it's because he's just not spending. And so a lot of these owners are trying to find that balance where they want to make as much money as possible on a year-to-year basis because they need cash to kind of grow sports around the world, baseball, basketball, football. I think one of the other dynamics too, when I talk to people around sports on the business side, they talk about how, the NFL is obviously the most popular sport in the United States, but Major League Baseball and the NBA might be better positioned for this kind of global growth of sports because the games are simpler, the rules aren't as complicated, and there's already kind of basketball culture that the NBA has invested in for, going on 2 decades now, dating back to like the establishment of NBA Africa, and obviously Asia with Japan and Korea, now Taiwan. They have established baseball cultures. And so there's already kind of an appetite for this kind of stuff. And so I think over the course of the next 2 decades, you're going to start seeing more private equity money coming in. Like, this is all kind of a downstream of the ownership mentality towards continued growth of wanting to make the valuations of these franchises bigger, even if they're not making as much money on a year-to-year basis. And a lot of owners are trying to find the balance between those two things.
Other teams have tried to go the opposite, free only. I think it's Vegas. The Knights, I think, went to just over-the-air TV and are trying to use an old-school model of just selling advertisement to try to make back that money. I was saying that as the valuations of those franchises go up, you're limiting the number of people that can be a part of it, and now you got private equity as a part of the whole thing.
Right, and I think the thing that's dangerous about it, and there's a lot of concern around this in Boston right now because the Celtics just sold for $6.1 billion, and they're one of the NBA franchises that are in prime position to kind of grow globally because of the history of the franchise and how important the Celtics are to basketball history as a whole. The initial sale that was approved, that was accepted by Wyc Grousbeck here, it was majority funded by private equity, and that's now since changed, according to reports, but those are the types of things that really concern people. People really are concerned about, is Bill Chisholm just going to be a front for this private equity thing? And there's more and more private equity money coming to the sport because a lot of these owners, the valuations of these franchises are massively high, and they're only continuing to go up, especially as these owners eye these global ambitions for the sports teams. But at the same time, it's not necessarily a business that gives you a lot of cash to have on a year-to-year basis. And a lot of these smaller market owners are going to be hesitant to, go to the bank and be like, hey, can I get a loan for a couple $100 million based off of the value of the because they don't want to go bankrupt. And a lot of these, it's just one of those situations where, because sports is kind of this uniquely weird business where the valuation of the franchise isn't actually, the valuation of the business isn't dependent on how much money they're making on a yearly basis. It's more kind of valuing the loyalty of the community around the team. And
the scarcity of the resource.
Right, and that's not necessarily like reflected in the kind of books, the revenue versus the expenses. Like, it's not a typical business in that way.
Well, and let's go one more on that, Joon, as you bring up the idea of, they're not going to go to a bank and ask for $200 million. Baseball, I know, and I think the other sports as well, have a debt cap. They only let their teams go into a certain amount of debt, right? And so we heard, a couple of months ago, that as Minnesota was being valued, they owe like $350 million because they're at what I would think would be their debt ceiling.
Mm-hmm. And that's when you kind of turn to private equity. Like, it's a solution. I've talked to executives in kind of these smaller market franchises across sports. It's not that they want to go into business with private equity, because they know kind of the Wall Streetification mindset, the consulting mindset that kind of comes with that has gutted out businesses across the country and industries outside of sports, from housing to, whatever else. They don't want to go into business with these people, but they look at the debt, they look at the money from the RSNs that's slowly shrinking, and they're like, we might kind of have to. And that's kind of already where European soccer is at. Like, I think the EPL and a lot of these European soccer leagues are already kind of showing where things are headed, where, there's not a salary cap there's not revenue sharing in the EPL. And a lot of the richest teams, like a team like Newcastle United was just bought by Saudi Arabia a couple years ago. They were kind of a middling, kind of mid-tier, soccer club in the EPL, but suddenly they're kind of a little bit more on the rise because they suddenly have all this oil money coming in from Saudi Arabia. The same is true of PSG in the French league in regards to their Champions League standing. Like, this is slowly, I'm not sure this is going to happen overnight, even in the next 5 years, but this is the direction things are heading in. And, I think it really does concern me that if the leagues, or even if government intervention doesn't happen, like, what is going to happen to sports? And I really do think that this is an issue bigger than sports too, because, we live in a time that's so politically polarized, and people live in completely different information spheres, regardless of what side of the kind of political aisle you're on. But sports is one of the few things in our culture that still has the potential to, unite people together in some ways, or at least just like build like small levels of trust. Because when you have an argument about sports, I think it's an easy way to kind of build trust, to have arguments about harder things in life. And so, like, when you don't have these like arguments at the water cooler with your coworkers, or just like debates with your friends, when things are actually getting tough in the country, do you actually have the foundation of trust to be able to confront those issues? I think it really plays into everything that's happening in our country right now from a political, cultural level as well.
No, Joon, Salk's just got this grin on his face.
Well, I'm laughing because that's like our story, me and Brock, two people from different political backgrounds and everything else that have come together over sports. Sorry, Brock, go ahead.
No, it's very true. Hey, my last thing for you is just, you talked about mining fans. Can you kind of elaborate? It was kind of a cool way to frame it and phrase it, and hadn't really thought of it in that way. What do you mean by mining fans?
I think that fans really underestimate the amount of power that they have in the whole sports ecosystem. And I, again, point to European soccer as the result of something that has already kind of proven how valuable fan loyalty is. When the Super League announcement happened, where basically the biggest clubs in the world, Barcelona, Liverpool, Manchester United, all those big teams came together. They wanted to basically create a video game like league where they're constantly playing each other and creating games that have massive hype with the biggest stars and are broadcasted all around the world. Kind of a video game type of soccer league. It drew such enormous backlash from fans. For 48 hours, people were blocking buses in front of the Chelsea Stadium to prevent players from getting in so the game couldn't happen. There were protests outside of stadiums. People were burning jerseys. Like, it turned into like what you might expect to see today at like a political rally, but outside of a sports stadium. Within 48 hours, the Super League was done. Like, it just didn't happen because the backlash was so strong. And I look at that and I'm like, ultimately, all of these businesses, the reason why the valuations keep going up and up is because these franchises are depending on the loyalty of people like you guys, people like me, people like your listeners, who care a lot about sports, and will pay to watch them, to go to those games, regardless of whether or not they win or lose. And so for them, it's like, if you're a sports owner, you kind of look at it and you're like, well, is it worth it to invest in a team that is really going to win if they, you spend a lot of money on players? Like, from a business standpoint, from a traditional like profit standpoint, what the Dodgers are doing isn't necessarily like the best thing for a traditional business. Like, if you're running Domino's Pizza or something, you're spending a lot of money to get a team on the field that may or may not win the World Series. But what I think that a lot of owners are underestimating with all of this is that the prestige of a franchise continues to go up. The valuation you can't buy the prestige of a championship. And so with all of those things, I think that fans are really underestimating, like, ultimately, these businesses only run because fans care about sports. And that loyalty, that emotional connection that we all have to our favorite sports teams, that is the most valuable thing in the world. It's the reason why the Dallas Cowboys are worth what they are. Right. It's the reason why the Yankees are worth what they are. And that's the difference between, the valuation between the most valuable teams in sports and the ones that are less valuable.
What about the player's role? Just a couple more minutes here with Joon Lee, and I recommend this piece in the New York Times, his opinion piece from a couple days ago. I tweeted it out just a few minutes ago, just so that you could find it easily. Player salaries have risen with a lot of the, that money we talked about that came in via people that were subsidizing the sports industry. I don't care whether an owner makes $1. It doesn't affect my life at all. I'm not interested in them making money. That's not my reason for being here. But I also am realistic enough to assume they're not going to be willing to lose money. So how does any of this get right-sized without salaries changing as well?
Well, I think salaries are going to continue to go up because that's the way that sports business has always gone. And I think, this growth is going to happen. Like, in April, when Major League Baseball opened their season, the Dodgers started in Japan. 27 million people watched the Dodgers play in Japan. That was a bigger audience, TV audience, than any audience that Major League Baseball had since, I think, the 2017 World Series. Like, this stuff is already underway, and the internet's making it easier and easier to be able to follow sports, around the world, whether it's, me following Liverpool from, my house in New York City, or, someone in Tokyo following the Los Angeles Dodgers, or someone in, Berlin following the New England Patriots. Like, it's easier and easier to do that. And so as all this money comes in, like, these athletes are going to become much more like celebrities. I think this is where Hollywood and sports are kind of slowly starting to merge. These leagues are starting to think of themselves as media companies, and the stars of these media companies are the athletes. It's the reason why, like, Juan Soto kind of only has like 3 options for teams he can go to, because there's only 3 teams that can kind of give him the market value that he justifies. I think to tie this all up too, like, Shohei Ohtani is, I think, the best example of this. I was talking to someone who I know who just moved from India 6 to 8 months ago and now lives in New York City. And he was telling me India doesn't follow baseball really at all, but people in his life know who Shohei Ohtani is because he's kind of this like singular Messi, Ronaldo, like transcendent figure for baseball. And it's creating a level of publicity for the sport that like you literally can't buy. And so when Ohtani got $700 million from the Dodgers a couple of years ago, people were kind of gawking at that contract. But, I heard from sources that Andrew Friedman was kind of openly saying at the World Series, like, oh, Ohtani's contract paid for itself in year 1. Like, this is a guy in terms of his like financial impact on the Dodgers, the amount of advertising he's bringing in from Japan. You guys have seen this with the impact that Ichiro had in terms of the Japanese market in Seattle. Like, it's one of those things that's like, you can't really buy that like international prestige. And now like the Dodgers, they might have like the Babe Ruth of this century. The images of Ohtani being in a Dodger jersey are going to last for hundreds of years now. That's like brand value that you just can't buy. And so the smart owners are going to recognize that these like icons, the Steph Currys of the world, the LeBron James of the world, the Patrick Mahomes, the Tom Brady's of the world, that like PR that you get from like just being a part of history, that's just publicity that you can't buy. Maybe you're not making it up in the moment, but it's going to come back all together in the long run in the valuation of your franchise and whatnot. Like, the Yankees are one of the most valuable teams in sport because Babe Ruth is just like a superhero in American history. Like, you just see the Yankee jersey everywhere, and not in a Ken Burns documentary, not even about baseball. Like that's just kind of the publicity that I think you just can't buy when you consider kind of these iconic figures
June,
in sports.
I could have this conversation for the next hour. Unfortunately, our show's about to end, so we got to let you go. But thank you. This was great. Appreciate your writing. Man, we didn't even get to the Dever stuff, which could have been a whole nother 10, 15 minutes. But thank you. Much appreciated. I hope everybody goes and reads this at the New York Times site. And looking forward to reading more of your stuff now that you're back as well. It's great.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing this and more on the YouTube channel as well.
All right. Yes, follow him on YouTube. Joon Lee, Joonlee.